That's us. We're back here, Philly's #1 college radio station, WHIP. Main event, Zach Gelb and Chase Sr. here with you. It's Allen Iverson night tomorrow night at the Wells Fargo Center. As number 3 will be hung in the rafters when they play the Washington Wizards. And now joining us on the hotline is a man that got to call many great Allen Iverson performances, and that's the play-by-play man for the Sixers on Comcast Sportsnet, and that's Marc Zumoff, a Temple alumni. Marc, it's Zach and Chase. How you doing?
I'm great, guys. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for coming on. You got to call a lot of classic Allen Iverson games to see the retirement that they're going to be and the ceremony that they're going to be having tomorrow night for him. What are some memories that come back into one Marc Zumoff's head when he thinks of Allen Iverson?
Well, there are a lot of them. I could just give you some bullet points. I remember when the Sixers were interviewing potential candidates for that top pick, and they brought Allen in, and I remember him before his news conference sitting in the audience. I think Pat Croce was at the podium, and I was sitting with him, and he was just talking about how excited he would be to come to Philly. And back then the Sixers had Derek Coleman, so he was eager to play with him. And if I join Coleman in Stackhouse, we'll be really good. And of course, we sort of know how that went. But then just in terms of him as a player later on, I'm thinking some of the highlights. The crossover against Jordan, which came in his rookie year, and the team only won 22 games that year, so you really had to look hard for your highlights, and that was clearly one of them. And then I think he finished that season with like 4 or 5 straight performances of 40 or more, and a lot of people fell on both sides of the fence of that one because while the team was losing, he was going off and getting his, so there were some who kind of lined up for criticism, but on the other hand, you got an idea as to how explosive he would be. I remember 1999 when the team started to get good. He had a great play in the backcourt where he was like a one-man press on Mark Jackson, and the fans were getting into it. And Jackson almost had a 10-second violation when Iverson stole the ball and fed Aaron McKee for a 3, and the place went crazy. 2001, of course, was an unbelievable ride for Iverson individually and the team, and just everything that was accomplished during the playoffs, the regular season. Actually, even before that, 99, when they first returned to the playoffs after the 8-year drought, he had 9 steals in a game for an NBA record for a playoff game. That was pretty special against Orlando. So I'm sorry that I'm rambling, but this is because of what we're doing tomorrow night. I've been thinking a lot about these things, and not necessarily coherently or in chronological order, but just throwing up a few things for your listeners to be able to think about.
Well, there's so many special moments, and he's a great pure scorer. And I was talking to Larry Brown when he came into Philadelphia to play the Owls a few weekends ago where Temple got the victory. And Larry told me that there's no doubt in my mind that that finals team would have won the whole thing if they were healthy because they had some injuries along the way. You look back at that finals team, if they were healthy, do you think they would have went out there and beat the Lakers and won an NBA championship?
Well, it's funny, and it probably doesn't matter in the scheme of things. I just think that Laker team was much better than that Sixer team. But you could have also asked Larry Brown about something that Sixer fans often mention to me in that the last game or last 2 games of the season, I think it was, where he sat Iverson and Kembe Mutombo for rest when the Sixers had an opportunity to have the best record in the NBA and game home court advantage throughout the playoffs, which they subsequently lost to the Lakers, and even though they beat the Lakers out there in that game 1, I just don't think it would have mattered. I think that even if the Sixers had had the home court, the Lakers probably would have won that series. But as I think back, Larry did a great job, first of all, assembling the 4 guys around Iverson that he did. And then George Lynch broke his foot in Game 2 of the Toronto series. That was the Eastern Conference semifinals. And Brown did a great job of keeping the game in the 70s and 80s in Game 3. The Sixers stole that and eventually came back here, won Game 5, and then went on to win the series. I think Eric Snow may have been playing with a broken bone in his foot, if I remember correctly. And then Iverson, he was like a walking injury. He always, with the elbow sleeves and and this was wrapped up, and this was hurting him, and everything else. But it was emblematic. That team was more emblematic of the Philadelphia blue-collar work ethic, I think, than any Sixers team I've seen, and I've seen them all going back to the first year of the team in '63.
Marc Zumoff, the play-by-play man for the Philadelphia 76ers, joins us on the main event, Philly's #1 college radio station, WHIP. Mark, it's Chase. When the Sixers took Iverson first overall in 1996, the Sixers were just a bad basketball team, and he helped make that franchise relevant again. And you've been calling the games for this team for a number of years. What was it like seeing that transformation from a bad basketball team in which nobody came out to the games to a franchise that sold out every single game and fans were garnering the #3 jersey and came out to the arena to see Allen Iverson play?
Back in '98-'99, we had a lockout, and we only played 50 games that year. And I just remember the anticipation for that season because Larry Brown had clearly made his imprint and brought in players that would be, in large measure, part of that 2001 team. And the team couldn't play because they were locked out. Well, they finally started that season in early February, and the Sixers ended up winning their division in the abbreviated season. I think they won 28 games. And then you really began to sense that things were turning around that year. And then, of course, the playoffs. It's the first time we had a playoff series in 8 years. And the Sixers were a 6 seed. The Orlando Magic then, with Penny Hardaway, they were a 3 seed. And the Sixers managed to split down there in the first 2 games. Orlando had the home court. Game 3 was at Wells Fargo Center. It was the first playoff game in 8 years. And that game really then signified to me that the team had fashioned a turnaround. Fans were into it from the time they got into the building an hour before tip-off to the final buzzer. We mentioned Iverson with the NBA record steals. I remember Matt Geiger almost got into a fight with the late Chuck Daly. The place was crazy from the moment they opened the doors until the moment the clock showed all zeros. And when I left the building that night, I said, you know what, we got something special going on here, and this team's going to be pretty good for the foreseeable future.
Allen Iverson certainly has a unique personality, and him and Larry Brown butted heads at times, and he also had some issues off the court, as you well know. You had the luxury of dealing with him on a personal basis, though. What was Allen Iverson like as a person to you?
He was really a delightful guy to be around. He was a regular guy who really enjoyed not only talking about basketball, but talking about things other than basketball. You could engage him in almost any conversation about anything. He was well-read, he was aware, and he enjoyed giving his opinion about other things. I think that just as a competitor, I don't believe that I've seen anyone who competed as hard for the time he was on the floor. Now, off the floor, many will say that he didn't do what he could have done to maybe lengthen his career or optimize his abilities. But I got to tell you, even some of the great players will occasionally take a possession off, and certainly on the defensive end, Allen wasn't the greatest. Maybe that's where he got the most of his rest. But when it came to the offensive end of the floor, when it came to fearlessness, when it came to competitiveness, and he didn't always do the right thing, but it wasn't for lack of trying. I think Allen was probably the most intense NBA player I may have ever seen.
One of the great audio clips in the history of sports was that practice press conference, and people still talk about it today. It's still played a plethora of times on SportsCenter. Where were you for the practice press conference?
Well, let me just say one thing about that. When Iverson had his retirement news conference a few months ago, and I don't remember the exact words, but I recall him addressing that particular thing and talking about the news conference, saying that many people don't know that I had a friend who was killed right before he held that news conference. So he wasn't really I don't think, of the right mind anyway. But I think Allen's point was that, yes, we all believe that perfect or that you play as you practice. But I think Iverson was saying, wait a second, I lay it on the line every time I come into a game. When I'm on the floor, there's not a second that I'm not getting after it, certainly on the offensive end, and giving my all and getting to the line 10 or 12 times and knocking heads with the big bodies of the NBA. So I think he almost considered it ludicrous that, wait a second, we're talking about practice? Well, just take a look at my scoring titles, and I got the team to the finals, and I've been an MVP, a two-time All-Star MVP, and all this other stuff. So I think he was saying he may have been minimizing it, which probably wasn't the right thing to do, but I think in his mind he was saying, listen, I've laid it on the line and I've accomplished a lot. Let's talk about me as a player as opposed to just showing up for a practice. I'm not saying it was right. I'm not saying it was right, but I'm just trying to think about what he was thinking about the day that all that went on.
We're spending a few minutes with Marc Zumoff from Comcast Sportsnet. And Marc, when he left in 2006, when he got traded, and you're always talking to players, fans, you do a great job at what you do. What were the emotions when he left in 2006? Because he's a very special player, as we all know.
Yeah, and I think it was a mutual parting of the ways. The 2001 Magic was there and gone, and Billy King, who became the general manager, tried to pair him up with Chris Webber, tried to pair him up with Glenn Robinson, and none of that seemed to be working. That's the real genius of Larry Brown, is that he surrounded him with essentially four blue-collar guys and let Allen do his thing. But it just wasn't going to work any other way. Allen seemed ready to go. The Sixers seemed ready to have him go. And that's not to minimize the run. I mean, the run was unbelievable. He was a great draw. He identified our franchise for the better part of a decade. But nobody felt bad about the parting. It was mutual, and it seemed good for Denver at the time. They were going to pair him and Carmelo Anthony, and maybe they could make it work, which obviously they did not. And for the Sixers, I have to think that in retrospect, it was going to be bad news for Andre Iguodala, because people looked around after Iverson left and they anointed him as the guy, which was really the wrong thing to do. But that's a whole other story. I think, just to answer your original question, was that there was a mutual parting of the ways. The time had come, the 10 years were in, and it was all good.
There's been a multitude of sensational guards to play in the National Basketball Association, but not a lot were 6 foot, $165, soaking wet, and able to score the rock like Allen Iverson did for a majority of his career. Do you believe, Marc, that he is the best small guard to ever do it?
I would have to say yes, and it's become hackneyed, but people often borrow the boxing phrase pound for pound, and in that regard, it would be a resounding yes. The only other guy that I would say reasonably compares to him, and I'm going way old school guys, you'll have to go to basketballreference.com for this one, would be Nate Tiny Archibald, who I believe may have been the last guy to win both a scoring and assist title in the same year, but he was of a similar vein. But when you consider Allen's playing style, his fearlessness, just constantly going into the lane, time and time again, getting battered, getting knocked to the floor. Just in terms of the fearlessness and almost recklessness that he played with, I don't think there's been anyone since then, and I'm not sure there will be anyone for the foreseeable future.
With the cornrows and the headbands and the arm sleeves and the tattoos, some of the...
Yeah, well, you know what? And that was all part of it, and that kind of made him as big as he was. It wasn't like he was some unassuming guy. He had the CD, the rap CD that was ill-fated, and to borrow the term lightning rod, he certainly was one. But if you're the owner of a team, and you believe that for the most part, any publicity is good publicity, Allen Iverson gave the 76ers a high profile, not only in this town, but in the other 28 cities or so in the NBA.
Right, he helped change the culture of the NBA and some of the youth movement coming up. I just wanted to get your quick thoughts on that.
Yeah, NBA has sort of morphed now, where you see a lot of players have gone away from that. Guys will show up in suits and ties, and they're a little more businesslike. But for that time, Iverson did embrace hip hop. He brought it a much more mainstream, and the NBA was already into combining entertainment and basketball. So the skids were already greased, and Allen just kind of brought his end of it into the mix. And for jersey sales of other teams and old school stuff and the whole hip hop culture and the tattoos and everything, you could certainly look at him and say he was the guy who brought all that about.
Two more questions with Marc Zumoff, the play-by-play man for the Sixers on Comcast Sports Net. And Marc, this team, the Sixers, they have a solid foundation in place already with Brett Brown at the head coaching position. You have Michael Carter-Williams, who's been sensational this year, and there's a lot of high expectations for Nerlens Noel as he is getting healthy. This team, though, has to continue to build through the draft. They made some trades to get some late second-round picks. They'll have 2 lottery picks as well. Do you have a preference, though, between the 2 big names and Andrew Wiggins and Jabari Parker?
You know what? I would have you on my show, guys, and ask you because I have no idea. I just don't watch college basketball. I'm just too busy covering the NBA and doing other things. I do on occasion speak with Sam Hinkier about it, and of course he's not in a position to tip his hand. But I think that Jabari Parker is considered the more skilled guy. I think Andrew Wiggins is considered the terrific athlete. I will say that with the rise of Joel Embiid, the 7-footer, some people don't even think that Wiggins is the best player now on his team, let alone the number 1 pick of the draft. So, listen, I think the more immediate concern is get through this season, and then the next step will be the draft lottery, which is just a matter of luck. And then depending on what kind of a pick you have, you figure it out that way, whether you want to try to move up to number 1, whether you already have number 1. You'll see if New Orleans turns out to be a lottery pick that's protected 1 through 5. You have all those second-round picks. You have Thaddeus Young, who could be attractive now with only 1 more year after this. Actually, wait a second, he has this year, he's got 2 more, so next year he'll have 1 more year left to his deal. He might be an attractive guy in a trade come draft night, so a lot of shoes to fall. And then, even once the team is in place next October, and I forgot to mention all the salary cap room, even once the team is in place next October, it's going to take a while. I mean, you have a guy like Anthony Davis. Now, granted, Drew Holiday has been injured, but it doesn't happen overnight. Davis is a great player. He's a stud. He's become an all-star. But, the Pelicans probably won't make the playoffs, albeit in the stronger of the 2 conferences. So even after you put the young players in place, it takes some time to develop them, put the right pieces around.
Marc, last one from me. When the Sixers signed Brett Brown to a contract, it was considered a quote-unquote sexy hire because he hails from the Greg Popovich coaching tree. He knew what he was getting into. He knew it was going to take a while for this team to improve and start coming out on the winning side of games. But considering what he was given on the roster and the circumstances at stake, what do you think about the job he's been able to do so far in his first season as 76ers head coach?
Well, if you consider his primary responsibility is to develop players, he's done a really good job. Michael Carter-Williams, now, granted this all started opening night, but still he was under Brett Brown's tutelage for a good month when you consider training camp and preseason. And I don't know anybody in basketball who is not surprised by what Michael Carter-Williams has done. So I would say give Brett Brown, a former point guard, some credit there. Players like Hollis Thompson, who were left undrafted, have become viable players. So that's Brett's main focus right now, is to do 2 things. He wants to develop players like he has with Carter-Williams and Hollis Thompson. And the second thing is to lay down the foundation for an identifiable playing style and culture, and he's done that. What he does not have are the players to fit into that playing style and culture. And that's up to Sam Hinkie and Brett in concert to both make that
Mark, enjoy tomorrow night. We appreciate the time today. Excellent job, and we'll talk to you again soon.
You got it, guys.
Thanks, Mark.
Marc Zumoff right there of Comcast Sportsnet. We'll take a quick break here on the main event. Philly's #1 college radio station, WHIP. Back after this.